Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Arrival of Autumn, Kingdom Undone, out May 26 on Nuclear Blast. This album has 11 tracks, 38 minutes in length, and this is the band's third full-length studio record. They are a Canadian metalcore band. As far as the design is concerned, this album is super compact, perhaps a bit too much compact, creating a lot of density in the sound. It's an album that just feels too thick from start to finish. And I don't mean just the sound is thick, the overall essence of the record, the way the songs connect with one another, and becomes really difficult to see the differences and the uniquenesses, and you keep concentrating on the commonalities. That is the main problem that this record offers. Now, being 38 minutes in length helps that perception, helps that perspective, but not enough. The album doesn't have enough nuances or impactful nuances that kind of break the mold and allow you to have pockets within this record to better appreciate where you are, where you were, and where you're going. It's an album that needed an intro, needed perhaps an interlude, and even an outro. It's an album that doesn't have a defined start, middle, and end. It just feels like everything is the middle. And because of it, it becomes a little bit overbearing at times. Not a record easy to process at first glance. And sometimes the first glance is all that you really have. A lot of listeners will not give time in order for this album to showcase all the uniquenesses that it holds, because they're very hidden within the overall sound experience. A sound experience that's very intense and very aggressive, those are two things you can walk away with from this album. But that doesn't mean that the record doesn't offer some melancholy, doesn't offer some sadness, doesn't offer some somber perspectives within the songs. It's just that they're not the ones driving the experience or impacting the experience directly. It's that aggression and that intensity. An album that has an interesting sound approach. You can really hear what all the different elements are doing. It's an album that really breaks them apart extremely well. You see the guitars, you see the drums and bass, you can feel where they are within the sound mix, and then you can feel the impact that they have on one another in order to create this dense wall of sound that comes at you almost with every single song. And even how they incorporated the vocals in it is extremely important. But it's not an album that's defined by one instrument, even though the guitar sound is definitely in the forefront of your perception and perspective. It's an album that depends on all three elements, drums, guitars, and bass, in order for you to have the full picture of what the sound on this album is all about. A sound that pushes the guitars more into the forefront, into the leading role, but still giving room to the other elements, while the drums sit a little bit more in the back, controlling the foundation of the record and giving the guitars the pathway for them to really excel and become impactful. And you see that in the melodies, you see that in the riffs, and you also see that in the guitar solos. It's a very guitar-rich album without necessarily being in your face in terms of how rich it is. It hides a little bit of its richness, but it's there nevertheless. I enjoy the drum sound, I enjoy the impact that they had, and not really overshadowing that direct movement the guitars offer to the sound, to the experience, to the mood, to the atmosphere, if you will, of an album like this. But I also enjoy the bass. I enjoyed the sound, I enjoyed how much it popped, and how important it was in connecting guitars and drums, but also connecting them differently. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. In some songs you hear the bass connecting better with the guitars in order to create grooviness, in order to make the songs feel like they have more bounce to them. It is not just heavy or aggression or intensity pushing them forward. In some songs you see them connecting better with the drums, holding things back a little bit more, changing the mood, creating a different perception, lowering the eyesight of the listener. So it's an important element, but one that has an underlining impact on everything that you're going to hear. I appreciate this perspective, and then I appreciate an album constructed in this way. And then when you see where they put the vocals, which is somewhere in the middle of everything, makes it even more important. It's an album that's built in layers, and the vocals are perhaps the core layer of everything that you're going to get from it. But a core layer that doesn't necessarily stay in the core, that has movement, sometimes dropping, not very often, but with the clean vocals you really see that drop, at least in terms of atmosphere, at least in terms of perspective. And definitely the mood changes when the clean vocals come in. They just don't come in a lot throughout the entire record, so when they do come in, they become a little bit more pronounced in the impact that they have. But you also feel them moving forward with their aggression, with their intensity, when you feel like there is something brewing on the inside, the vocals are not afraid to jump out of the track and really have an impact that almost parallels the guitar sound all around. So it's a production that enhances the quality of the individualities of this album while trying to create something unique. And it creates something unique but balanced at the same time, because the sound that you're going to get in the beginning of the record, without some nuances here and there, is pretty much the sound that you're going to get throughout the entire album. So it's a very consistent record across every single element. There are nuances, there are ebbs and flows, but very minimal as far as the sound, as far as the impact that the guitars have, and even as far as the vocal range is concerned. Like I said, some clean vocals here and there, just in order to break the monotony that you would get just from that intensity and aggressive, harsh vocal performance. It's an album that becomes one of those records that it's almost impossible at times to see the forest from the trees. It needed better definition. It needed better definition in the construction, and it needed better definition in the sound. Like I said, beginning, middle, and end. This record doesn't feel defined with those parameters. This is not to say that the songs don't have quality, and if you're listening to them on random shuffle, if you're hearing a song here and there, the quality of the tracks will stand up. The songs have great attributes. But if you're listening to this album from start to finish, the first impression that you get is perhaps the impression that's going to stay with you, which is that of density, an album that's too thick, an album that is too equal, and it doesn't have enough jolts to really wake you up. Aggression and intensity are great, but you need something else in order to make them really feel more impactful. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Ghosts. Great guitar sound, groovy, heavy, a song that brings in the vocals with a lot of intensity and aggression, and then you have the clean vocals bringing in a sense of melancholy to how this track comes together. The melancholic melodic guitar sound enhances what the vocals are doing, and the vocals enhance that same sound. The two are connected at the hip, and those are the valleys, because this is a song that has more peaks than valleys, or at least you're feeling like you're always at a higher level with this track, and you only dip down for a few seconds, for a few minutes before jumping back up again. So it's a track that has movement, but it's movement that feels in reverse. It doesn't start low and peaks, it starts high and drops. It's an interesting perspective. It works really well because of the quality of the clean vocals introduced to the song and the overall melancholic mechanism that the track has in sound and vocals working together as one. So it's a track that reverses the polarity of its natural state, and that is what makes this song stand out. Next we have One More Day. This is a more straight up hardcore song. It feels more like a hardcore track than a metalcore track. It feels that way from a soundscape point of view, but it also feels that way from a vocal performance standpoint. It still has some grooviness to it, it still has some melodic elements to it, but it's a song that just feels thicker, it just feels heavier, it just feels more in your face, almost from the start all the way to the end. You see it in the way it's constructed, you see it in the sound that it puts together, and then you see it in the vocal performance like I mentioned. At the midway point, this track completely changes. It takes a 180. It goes into a more guitar, melodic, and melancholic stretch that then eventually leads you into the guitar solo. That portion of the song feels so out of place at first glance, because the track for half of it, it's just a straight up, in your face, intense, hardcore song, and then almost becomes more of a metalcore track, at least a metalcore track that dips into a darker side. And that's an interesting dynamic, because it's a dynamic that just really divides the song into two. It's a song that's polarizing because of that, but it's a song that's important. It's just you needed more songs like this throughout the record, because it's a track that has all those right attributes and it mixes them really well, creating two complete polar opposite perspectives with one single song. The album needed more jolts like One More Day. You really need to feel like you're being pushed to the limit, and you almost need to be made a little bit uncomfortable in the overall execution. And this song kind of gives you that sense of, I thought I knew where I was, and now I'm completely lost in terms of where I'm going. But it's a very interesting track because of that change, that polarization that it gives. Last but not least, Bury Me. I really enjoy the clean, somber vocals that this track has. It's a song that builds up and that's its traditional approach. It just continues to build until it reaches the chorus, then it resets, builds again until it reaches the chorus, and it resets. It follows that kind of format. It never really changes that format, but it also doesn't change the darkness that it has. Even in its heavier moments, even in its more intense moments, the dark underbelly that this track creates, or the perspective that it gives you at the beginning, is pretty much staying close to the song all the way through. And that growth really impacts the song in a positive way because you feel like you're trying to reach something. But it comes down to the darkness of sound and the darkness within the vocal performance. These two elements are definitely the core elements that make Bury Me a much different song from everything else you're going to hear on this album. These three songs have a lot of unique elements to it, but they're hidden within all of the everything else that this album offers. This record really could have used a few more songs like that, or perhaps, like I said earlier, connecting them better with an interlude, opening, and outro in order for the fluidity of the record to be more dynamic. But it's an album that still has a lot of quality individually. It's just maybe it doesn't show it in the collective. This is it. Arrival of Autumn, Kingdom Undone, out May 26 on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.